Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. We are covering today in our webinar cyber resilience. It's a topic that we've been hearing from customers quite a bit recently, just really asking, what do I need to be thinking about? It's something that's been talked about over the years quite frequently, but I think it's sort of gaining a bit more ground now. So we thought we'd do a quick webinar on it, talk about what is it that you need to be thinking? How can you approach cyber resilience? What sorts of things are included in it? And we're just going to cover that off as a topic. We've got about half an hour to cover off the topic. And so we're going to try and cover as much as we can. But the reality is we probably won't be going into huge amounts of detail in any one field. But no doubt we'll do further follow-up webinars once we find out from people what they want us to cover in the future. We're more than happy to hear from you as to what you want us to cover in the future. So just let us know and we'll look to put something together. About me, so I'm Ollie, CEO and co-founder at defense.com. I've been in the industry for about 15 years now, or more than 15 years, and I've always covered cybersecurity topics of all different types. I've been a penetration tester, been involved in helping organizations around consulting them on security best practices, technologies, and been an evangelist talking out about the best practices around cybersecurity, what you can do to improve your security, areas that organizations struggle with, and sort of really just helping to promote cybersecurity as a whole. Defense.com is all about making cybersecurity easy and trying to help organizations to elevate their cybersecurity strategy really quickly by providing loads of different tools and technologies in one place. And so we've always looked at cybersecurity in a holistic way. So not just focusing on one specific area of cybersecurity, but trying to make it simple, easy and innovative for everybody to adopt, no matter how large or small the organization is. So I thought I'd just start out with just a bit of an awareness piece. Organizations often are looking at cybersecurity because there's a need for it, because they've been driven to it by their customers. But just to give you a bit of a understanding of what's happening out there at the moment, organizations are being targeted really frequently now. You know, it's a statistic that I know it's a very sort of fear-mongery type stat, but an attack happens every 39 seconds or so. And I guess really you need to be thinking what constitutes an attack. But we also have done some research into this. We're running honeypot systems, which are basically servers out on the internet that are a target to attackers in such a way that they would look to try and see if they could exploit the system. And we're finding that if you put a system out on the internet, within around 32 milliseconds, you're going to see the first interaction with that server. Generally speaking, that lands up becoming things like botnet activities, so scanners, systems trying to find a way in which to find an in, essentially. How can they exploit those systems? I often get customers ask me, like, are we a target? Why would we be a target? We don't really have anything interesting that an attacker might be after or try to exploit. We don't really have any sensitive information. But the key thing is that lots of times organizations just being caught up in another attack, or it's just purely opportunistic. If you have a system that's vulnerable, it becomes a benefit to an attacker for a number of reasons. They can use it in their other attacks that they might be building up, like a larger attack where they need hosts that they can try to exploit and use as part of that attack. It could be as a way to spam or to phish other organizations. There's lots of benefits to hacking just anything that's available, and there's plenty out there on the internet. And certainly people are asking me more and more, and I think this is something that has been talked about a lot in the industry, is how complex and how sophisticated are these attacks getting? And if you think about it logically, as we put more and more security controls in place to block and protect our organizations, the attackers have to overcome those hurdles. And when I think back to my career, in the very early stages, we spent a lot of time helping businesses to protect the perimeter, because that's the first thing that an attacker finds. That's what's exposed. And that is something that is easy for an attacker to get access to. They have unlimited access to it, really, because most externally facing systems are available 24/7, 365. And so what we spent a lot of time doing in general in the cybersecurity industry is just helping people to protect that perimeter. But as organizations did a better job of protecting the perimeter, the attackers then diversified and started trying to target internal assets, employees' laptops, and of course started to do things like social engineering, so trying to phish people, that try to get people to follow links and to try and exploit them through using malware, which would then get deployed locally on those systems inside the network, which was at the time the soft underbelly of the security. Right, it's the one area where you could exploit systems and gain almost total control over an organization through that access to that internal network. And once you're in a network, generally speaking, same is true of social engineering. If you break into a building, once you're in, you're kind of trusted, and people don't tend to have the focus on as much people within your organization and systems in your information as they should have. Really challenging people if they're in the business and they're walking around. The same is true of the network. If you're not monitoring your network, you're not looking at what's going on in your network, you're not going to spot stuff. So yes, the attackers are getting more and more sophisticated. They're starting to bypass more and more systems. We talked about it just this week about an attack that's come out that's targeting Microsoft 365 users, whereby the attackers have evolved into using things like reverse proxy technologies because we put multi-factor in their way. And so when you try to log in normally, if you could steal somebody's credentials, you could just log in. Now, when we put multi-factor in, that stops that ability that if you get access to somebody's users' credentials, username and password, you could just log into a system. Nowadays, you have to have this second factor authentication. So the attackers take the approach whereby they would now try to find methods to get access to this multi-factor authentication to then try and log in. So, of course, they're evolving, they're changing their strategies. The one thing I would say, however, is that most of the best practices that we put in place are things we've known about for years and attackers have been exploiting for many years, and still they're being successful. The other thing that I always say to organizations as well is that do you have a really good understanding of what you've got out there? So what is at risk? What are your core risks? Because like I said, people will ask the question like, am I really a target? Well, you won't know until you know what your risks are. So is there data present somewhere that an attacker might be interested in? Have you got systems that are particularly well connected or have high resources that they could utilize or benefit from? Is there sensitive data out there that could be used against you for to hold you to ransom, or could be exposed in such a way they could make money out of it, monetize it? Ultimately, a lot of the attacks that are happening are due to attackers wanting to monetize the attacks. So thinking back from the point of view of what have I got that they might want to have access to and how could they possibly access that system helps you to understand both how you can protect it, but also how you could deal with it if you do get breached. You know exactly where the data was, you know what could have been lost, how they might have had access to it. It then helps you to understand how do you work around that incident and try to take all that information in and then say, okay, how could they achieve this? So you can understand how to contain it, how to eradicate, and how to recover from the incident. So thinking about that is something I don't think organizations often do. They don't take a step back and say, okay, if we were to get breached, how would it happen and what would we do about it? And that needs to happen more. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to talk about cyber resilient. What's it all about? To be honest, it's been talked about for many, many years. Like I said at the opening, the reality is that it's something that requires lots more than just one concept to be considered. So I'll sort of talk through those key components, and we'll also talk about things like tools that help to improve your overall cyber resilience. And we'll also talk about some of the things we find when we're helping people out with these tools, where they've got gaps and where the issues are and why they're challenges and why there are issues around some of these tooling and why cyber resilience is not always that straightforward for a business. We give you practical tips just around strengthening your organization's resilience against cyber attacks, provide you with some insights into defense in depth, which I'll talk quite a bit about, which helps to bolster your overall security. And then also just really to help you have some sort of confidence in understanding what cyber resilience is all about and how it helps in your security strategy. Because ultimately, I'm sure you've got customers of your own, you've got employees that want to feel confident in that you're protecting their data and you're really considering how you can secure your organization. It also helps if you are a business that's supplying services to other organizations. It helps you to sell your services. You know, people want to work with people that are compliant and secure. We're certainly hearing a lot at the moment. Even ourselves, we're being questioned by our third party saying, how do you implement this security control? Do you have policy and procedures for this? Do you do a regular pen test? Do you have cybersecurity in place? So you're going to get more and more of this. More and more organizations are going to be asking you about this. You really need to have a good understanding and be able to address the problem and have a good answer to what you're doing in a lot of these areas. So we're here to help you to understand that. So why don't we just start with what's cyber resilience? It's basically the ability for your organization to prepare for, withstand, and recover from cyber attacks. So most organizations do a reasonably good job of preparing. So being prepared for an attack, they put all the security controls in place, they capture log information, they have technologies out there that are trying to identify where they've got gaps, like vulnerability scanners to be able to patch things. The challenge generally with what we're seeing is when people get hacked, it does almost always hit them, square in the face as a shock. Like, how did this happen? Why would this happen to us? What do we need to do next? It's just that kind of surprise. And there was some statement made once before, I think it was somebody like Muhammad Ali or Tyson, that said everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. The idea here is that you should never be in that situation. You should always be prepared to get that punch in the face and know that it's coming. And that's why cybersecurity relies on people doing lots of testing and testing out their strategies, their processes, their procedures. And if they get a breach, it isn't that kind of knockback immediate reaction where you think, well, what are we supposed to do next? You kind of kick into first gear and you get on with it. You know exactly what you need to do. You know what the process is, you know how you contain it, you know how you talk to your clients, you know what the communication needs to be, you know who in your business needs to be to help out to recover and deal with it. And that takes a lot more than just technology, right? I mean, and processes. There's a few more things that come into that. It's that kind of protect, detect, respond approach, but that relies on you having a good understanding of what people need to be involved in the process. This is not just in an incident, right? This is day to day. Like, what are people doing to help protect your business? What are they doing to improve your security? Are they aware of the security risks? Are there processes to make sure they follow what they should be doing day in, day out? And I know it's difficult because people just do their job naturally and they don't think about a process. But if they're trained well, they know the steps in that process to make sure that you're thinking about cybersecurity, you're thinking about things like data privacy. And that's really ultimately what they're there to do, is just to give people, if this scenario happens, what should I be thinking? What should I be doing? It's not a case that we're expecting them to look at this process every day and look down a list and say, step one is to follow the process. It's more, here are all the core component parts of what we want you to be thinking and doing, because it's important for security and compliance. And how you go about it needs to be aligned with these things, but it shouldn't stop them from doing their day job ultimately. Of course, technology plays a massive part. If you get the technology right, you can detect things faster, you can remediate things better, you can stay ahead of attackers and stop stuff before it becomes an issue. Where technology becomes tricky is if you don't maintain it, you don't keep it up to date, and you've got this false sense of security that technology is going to solve all the problems for me, and it doesn't. And that's where things go horribly wrong. So you need to be on top of that as well. But like I said, the key thing for me is knowing your risks. Like, where is somebody likely to target you? What data do you have? How would they manage to access it? Because cybersecurity professionals like us, the only way we can help an organization is if we understand that as well, because we can help to make sure you've got the right protection in place, you've got the right policies in place, you've got the right people and the right training in place to make sure that that can't happen for your business. But ultimately, cyber resilience is about being prepared for the worst. And if something really bad happens, you know what you need to do, and it's second nature to you. So let's have a look at the protection side of things. So obviously this stage typically just involves having safeguards in place that will help to protect you against the cyber attack. Things like, do you have a way to prevent unauthorized access? We've talked a bit about that in things like multi-factor authentication. Have you got that turned on? Other things that exist for that sort of attack, where somebody's trying to unauthorized access to your systems, involve technologies. So technologies being able to block access from locations which maybe you don't trust, or block malicious access from systems. There are also, of course, ways in which you can restrict users by location that can help you to implement good security best practices to stop unauthorized access, but ultimately also looking for persistent attempts to try and exploit your systems through unauthorized access. The ultimate goal is, of course, to disrupt the attackers. The more you can do to put something preventative in place up front means that they're less likely to target you, because they're going to look at your environment, they do a reconnaissance activity if they're particularly targeted, and they'll look at the return on investment, like how much time will it take me to exploit this system? Am I going to get the same return? Do they have something that I really need? Because if they do, then unfortunately they're just going to keep trying to target your systems and get access to them, and they've got no costs, right? They can just carry on trying to exploit your systems. Like I said, opportunistic attackers are just going to prey on the weak. If you don't have enough best practices in place, you don't have the right technology in place to block this stuff, they're just going to exploit you, and they're going to be looking at known vulnerabilities in your systems. They're going to be doing all that day in, day out, and they're just going to be scanning the internet without even thinking about it. Also think about things like least privilege, because like I say, cyber resilience is all about the worst case scenario, right? So least privileges helps you to address that worst case scenario. If they were to ever gain access to your systems and your administrator only has access to limited things, and their admin account can't completely take control over your whole environment, the worst case scenario is they're going to be able to get in and do something, whatever that least privilege is. So let's say you make sure your admins can only add new users because there's an administrator that has the ability to add a new user when they're onboarded into your business. The worst case scenario, if an attacker gets access, is going to be able to add a new user to your system, as an example. Obviously not a perfect example, but a semi-example. The other way to do protection is maybe not what you think. It's not about protecting your business by putting technologies and things in place necessarily. Sometimes it's about putting protection in place, which could be your people. They are your path. They are the path of least resistance at the moment for attackers. Almost all of the attacks that I see, that are significant attacks more recently, have relied on some sort of social engineering element, whether it's phishing, or whether it's some sort of WhatsApp kind of communication to an individual, or connecting to somebody on LinkedIn. Most of them have that kind of starting point. And that is because it's easy to do at the moment. There's so many organizations have employees that are uneducated, and it's very easy to make these attacks look very genuine and very difficult to detect. But of course, to protect yourself, you need your employees to help you out with that. And there's loads of things you can do. Like a good example is in Outlook, there is an option to turn on a feature that allows you to mark something as a spam email. It's good practice to have your employees looking at email and trying to assess, is this spam? And if it is, telling you about it, or telling Microsoft about it, because then they can go on to block it. Loads of emails get through Microsoft's security system that shouldn't get there through. They're phishing emails that they just get through. Even if you put on their safe links, they can get through, because attackers are evolving, they're doing new things, they're finding ways to get around Outlook. So definitely think about that. And of course, because so many people use Outlook and Microsoft products, it's a target for attackers to find ways around these controls and solutions they have in place. Incident response planning is a crucial one. I know it sounds like it's a retrospective, bad things happen, but if you're planning in advance, you can start to spot some of these attacks, because you're going to be looking out for incidents. You're going to be trying to address those incidents. So planning helps you think about, how do I put the right protection in place to make sure the worst doesn't happen? But if it does, of course, you're prepared for it. And like I said, risk management. Know what you've got, know where it is, how do you get access to it? How might an attacker try to exploit your systems to get access to that sensitive data? Now, detection is a big one that we see organizations getting horribly wrong. They're either not doing it badly, or they're relying too heavily on tools that aren't doing a job or not set up properly. This stage, of course, is just purely about, if you are looking, you're more likely to find something if you look for it, obviously. So keep an eye out for stuff. Suspicious activity can be relatively easy to detect. And you don't necessarily have to be an expert if you do have the right tools, but sometimes you just need expertise and people that can monitor this 24/7. So seek the advice of experts. But the key thing here is make sure you're getting log data from all the critical assets you have in your systems that are likely to be that target. Like I say, work back from that risk area. Like if you know you've got sensitive data, make sure you've got logs from the system that stores the sensitive data, the switches or the virtual switches or the infrastructure that it's hosted on. Have you got logs for that? Have you got access to the logs of the administrative control plane of those systems? All of those things need to come in to somebody who can monitor it and look at it and say, is this normal behavior or not? Threat intelligence. So a lot of what happens out there in the wild is communicated through threat intelligence data, which is great information if you know how to weed through it and look at that information. So make sure you are keeping on top of that. There are technologies out there. We've done a lot to try and develop technologies that just make it super easy for an organization to be able to find threat intelligence data. But the most important thing is, what do you do with it when you get it? Is there a way to remediate it? What are the remediation steps? That all needs to be clear. And again, with the right technology, you can absolutely achieve that. And somebody can take that threat intelligence data, remediate the problem before anybody even tries to exploit that new piece of intelligence. So that's why it's so key to be on top of it. But understandably, for many businesses, it's really tricky because threat intelligence is coming in daily. There's new stuff happening every day. There's new attacks. There's new issues all the time. And you want to be on top of that as much as you can. Incident response planning, I've touched on this quite a lot already. My best advice on this is just to regularly test your plan. Have a process, have the right people. If you have to just do tabletop exercises, that's perfectly fine, but it doesn't really simulate reality. You're generally just sitting around a table going, if something happens, what do we do about it? But the reality is that you're better off testing. Like, can you do things like, could you like simulate an attack? Like, is there a way in which you could do that to test your tools, test your people, see if they're picking these things up? Not to sort of not to call somebody out for doing a bad job, more for the fact that some stuff is very difficult to detect unless you've tried it and seen if your tools can pick it up. So have a process for that, right? Have a think about how you might be able to test it with real life scenarios and real world scenarios, because it's going to help you to make sure that you're addressing those problems and you have a plan when it does happen. Of course, security awareness education training, I'm finding more and more businesses are doing it. But it's not just about doing the training. You almost need to validate the training's working. There's numerous ways in which to do it, running exams, of course, but also doing things like phishing exercises, which again, I know lots of people are doing. They're trying to address it by really understanding people's understanding. Some of the things that I'm seeing quite commonly happening now is that if you see something out there, a particular campaign, phishing campaign that's being successful, is to simulate that back into your organization just to see how they might approach it. A bit like the incident response planning, you're kind of firing a phishing email into somebody and then seeing, would that have worked? And if it would have worked, then of course you know what you're dealing with. You know how you can train people and how you can assess that in a different way. Of course, I'm a massive fan of penetration testing, and we're certainly hearing this as well from insurers as well, that they're now expecting organizations, in order for them to reduce their premiums, their insurance premiums, they have to do a pen test. Have to have things like monitoring in place, like the SIM tool for doing log monitoring. So have a bit of a strategy on how you're doing this. You don't need to be doing penetration testing every week, every month. You just need to be doing at least one pen test a year, mandatory, of your critical assets. And then I would suggest doing regular vulnerability scanning or application scanning in between the period of your next test, because new patches come out all the time, new vulnerabilities come out all the time. You might improve, modify your application, and if you do and you leave it until your next test, you're never going to find out whether you've got that vulnerability until the next test comes around. So make sure you've got that in your strategy. And then from a response point of view, how do we deal with the response? Now, this is the biggest part I think organizations are really struggling with. There's a reason why there's stats out there that say organizations take 278 days on average to detect a breach, is because the detection's not in place, but also they're not very good at responding. It's kind of responding to the events, the systems that the stuff that your systems are telling you about. And the crucial thing, of course, these days is, because organization or attackers are targeting organizations with ransomware, you need a really strong backup strategy, because the chances are you're not going to get your data back. So you've got to have a good strategy to be able to get that data back quickly and get yourself back up online. The worst case scenario is if they've managed to encrypt your backup, you're in a position where you can't provide services to your customers. And that's terrible, right? That's what you don't want to be in a position to. So just making sure you've got a backup or some sort of resiliency strategy that, worst case scenario, you can flip to a new environment and you can carry on with your day and work on the incident response part separately to that. This is why things like cloud technologies are so good, because you can spin up new environments that are fresh and clean and have all the latest patches on without disrupting your customers, or having this kind of cloud infrastructure that's tainted or is malicious in some way, quarantined off. So you can still do all the incident response stuff. You can deal with that. You can find out what happened, what would they have access to, what have they managed to exfiltrate, if anything, what level of access do they have, in a safe way that it's quarantined. They can't do anything to harm you or your customers anymore. You've quarantined it off. So having a strategy to be able to do that is really smart. Of course, reporting and documenting. If you do suspect or have experienced a breach, you've got to have a really good way to document the process all the way through. Again, something we've worked really hard on our technology stack to try and address for customers, to make it easy for them to document everything that happens in the security space in one place. So if somebody comes and asks you what happened, how can you tell me what happened? Show me what's been going on so I can help you out. You need a way to be able to document and collect all that information, which is crucial to be able to learn from it, recover, and of course make sure that it doesn't happen again in the future. Have a relationship with an incident response party, even if it's just who you would call, but it should definitely be in your incident response process, because you want to be in a position whereby if something bad happens, you can pick the phone up immediately to an incident responder, and they can immediately support you. If you've got to go through the process of finding a vendor, getting the right price for it, understanding what the process is going to look like, it's going to take too long, and you're going to miss a load of evidence possibly, and you'll have hackers in your environment exfiltrating data. You want to contain it as quickly as possible and investigate later. The forensics and investigators will help you with that, respond to it. And the last part, I guess, really from a response point of view, is having the right things in place as an organization to be able to communicate effectively. Some of the worst incidents I've seen over the years from big breaches is that the businesses themselves did a really bad job of communicating, and the faith and the confidence in that organization was completely lost by the customers. So if you know what has happened and you've dealt with it and you've addressed the problem, you can be confident in communicating to your clients. Look, we knew this was going to happen. This is why cyber resilience is a thing. We knew this was going to happen. We were prepared, and we did everything we could, and we've solved the problem, and we addressed it all, and we've learned from it, and we're going to make sure we've got all the controls in place so that it doesn't happen again. Some really large cybersecurity companies have had breaches, and they've had great press around it because they did such a good job dealing with it and such a good job communicating to their customers and being honest about it, that it worked in their favor, and it came across really, really well. So if you're doing a good job there and you're remediating, you're improving your security off the back of that, what more could your customers ask of you? So key tools every business needs to be thinking about. Absolutely need endpoint protection. You're trying to stop ransomware from malware from getting deployed on your machines. This is the easiest way for that to stop the basic stuff from getting exploited. There will always be 0 days and new malware that comes out, but the endpoint protection vendors like a defense.com will be finding and updating our signatures regularly to make sure that we're protecting you against these new and evolving attacks. So having that in place is critical, especially with things like remote working. You can quarantine, you can block, you can save your remote workers from being exploited by deploying a simple thing as an endpoint protection product, which is so easy to deploy and get out there into your environment nowadays. Monitoring is only ever as good as your SIM and how well it's set up. Make sure you've got it well set up, it's being monitored, good configuration, got the right people looking at it. Training, of course, crucial. We know that phishing is a big part, and the only way you can really address phishing, aside from implementing security controls, which, like I said, even Microsoft gets it wrong and sends the wrong emails through, or in most recent cases, actually, Microsoft's been blocking legitimate sites, thinking they're malicious. So having training in place, having the right tools in place is crucial. Backup and recovery, like I said, worst case scenario, we're working on with cyber resilience, you've got to have a good process in place. Network security, because if an attacker gets in, they're going to try and hit everything else in your network. So you want to be able to spot that, deal with it. And of course, you want to be looking at least privileges and strong password policy, using identity access management, as well as things like multi-factor authentication, because attackers go after this stuff in a big way. All right, so wrapping it up, in summary, how I think about cyber resilience and why I think it's so important, and I think it's going to continue to grow and people will hear more about it over the next few years, is that it's just good practice. It's defense in depth. It's basically looking at not just one security control, like training your users and thinking that's going to solve all your problems. It's implementing all these different things in a sensible, clear, concise, easy to use way. And sometimes it's tricky if you're trying to pull all these products and technologies into one place. But again, that's the reason why we've been looking at innovating in this space, trying to develop tools and stuff that helps it make it easier for you. But really, you needed to develop a comprehensive cybersecurity strategy. You need to invest in the tools and you need to maintain them. Unfortunately, that's just part and parcel of doing cybersecurity. Train your employees, like we've said. Make sure you're regularly assessing your systems, not just pen tests, doing regular scans. We've got this recon tool, which is particularly good. It just keeps you in front of the attackers, knowing how they think, looking at how they operate. Tools like that, tools that can assess the risks of your exposure. All those things are really good practice. So implement something like that if you can. Regular risk assessments as well on your providers like Microsoft. They have tools as well. You can run health checks and stuff on to see how well secured you are. Attackers are looking for that sort of stuff. If you have one mistake, misconfiguration, you're going to be hit with it. Look at OpenAI. They've just had a misconfiguration that exposed a load of data. So it happens to the best of us. And then the last part, of course, is just making sure that you've got an incident response plan that's in place and you're regularly testing and evaluating your resilience. So if bad things happen, you know what to do about it and you can address it as quickly as possible. We really appreciate you joining. Like I said, if you've got any feedback, you want us to cover different topics, there's something that you're unsure of, that you think we should have covered in more detail. We want to hear from you, and we want to do all we can to promote security best practices. So we're here to deliver more and more content that you are interested in. So let us know what it is. We appreciate your time, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one.